possible to take this mobile? All right. Is that okay with everybody? Great. Well, good evening. Welcome. Apologies for being a little late. We're in the midst of a congressional campaign. It's a little heated right now. 40 days left, I think, so we're trying to be everywhere, and this is a big district. As many folks have been paying attention to this cycle, it hasn't really been easy. The lines have been shifting, dates have shifted for different elections during the primary, but everything's set now. November 8th, 15 counties, New York 21. And our objective is to be everywhere and everywhere. And that's one of the reasons why we're here tonight, is to have a town hall. We're doing town halls in every single county in New York 21. And one of the things that we just spent a little bit of time doing is we're videotaping this. And we're going to release this and put it out on YouTube because we believe that it's important to show up in the community. We believe it's important to avail yourself. These, my view, baseline requirements for representation. Show up, listen to people's concerns, hear them out, understand what their hopes are, their challenges, and hopefully offer some opportunities to address those things. Now, one of the disclaimers I'll put up front, I'm not yet a member of Congress. And so as we talk tonight, I won't have pieces of legislation that I'm working on to address your particular concern. But what I hope that we'll have the opportunity to do is to highlight any of the issues you want, to be able to talk through those things. And it's probably going to cut out a little bit here and there, but that's fine, I can project. And then there may be instances where I don't have an answer to your question or issue, and I'll acknowledge that, and I'll go work on and make sure that we can find that. But what I thought I'd do, Ed did a great job. I may talk a little bit about, right at the very beginning, who I am, why I'm running, some of the issues we're focused on. Then we'll open it up for questions, and we'll preserve a little bit of time at the very end, about 10 minutes or so. Because if you're not comfortable asking a question or raising an issue in front of everybody, I want you to have the opportunity to come up to me in person, and we can talk one-on-one if that's okay. So I am Matt Castelli, and I'm running for Congress. Two most important pieces of information that you could walk away with here tonight are those two pieces of information. I'll be on your ballot in November. I was born and raised down in the Hudson Valley, not too far away, and I grew up in a bipartisan household. Mom was the Republican, Dad's the Democrat. And politics wasn't important in our lives, right? Not in the way it's become so these days. What unified us were values. Those are the things we focused on. Those are the things we had in common, certainly in my household. My last name, Castelli, in Italian means castle. And so providing a sense of safety, security, and strength is really a part of who I am, what my family values were all about. I went to Siena College, not too far away from here, and 21 years ago when I was there, 9/11 happened. That became a driving force for my career. I went and joined the CIA not too long after that to do counterterrorism work, where I spent much of my career doing that kind of stuff. I led teams hunting down some of the world's most dangerous terrorists. I worked in the same department that found Osama bin Laden. I did comparable work. Served in places like Afghanistan and Iraq, and all of that led to an opportunity to go down to the White House and serve as the Director for Counterterrorism at the National Security Council in the Obama administration. A role the Trump administration asked me to stay on it, and I did, for the first year of the Trump White House. Because if I learned anything throughout my career of public service, it's this. When it comes to protecting our country, protecting our community, my family, yours, it requires us to put country before party. And my belief in that has never wavered. Now, went back to CIA, did some work for about 2 years or so with cutting edge technology startups, got a business degree, and then COVID hit. And as you all know, we got to a point pretty quickly where we were having a 9/11 every single day in this country in terms of deaths. It was the most compelling challenge of our time. Now, my family, my grandfather, who was a very critical figure in my life, he was an Army doctor at West Point. He got out of the Army, remained a physician, and he raised a family of nurses. Everyone in my family is a nurse, with the exception of my mother. She served in a different way. She became a teacher. But my grandpa instilled within all of us a sense of duty, a duty to care. And so when we got to this point pretty quickly with COVID, where we were having so many deaths, so many people with serious illness, and some are still struggling with that, I decided to leave government after nearly 15 years, and I joined a healthcare organization here in New York, started by veterans, to better coordinate care for veterans, rural communities, folks who have a hard time accessing care, by focusing on human and social service providers. connecting health with social care. So much of our health and well-being happens in our communities with our human and social service providers, really transformational work. I loved what I was doing. Did it for about a year and a half or so, building out coordinated care networks throughout the Northeast. And then January 6th happened. And as you might imagine, a former counterterrorism guy who spent a career trying to prevent things like that from happening in foreign capitals, to see it happen in our own didn't sit too well with me. But what really didn't sit well with me was the response and input and actions of our incumbent Congresswoman Stefanik. And I think she turned her back on our democracy that day. I think she violated her oath to the Constitution, the same oath I took when I joined the CIA many years ago. I think she sold us out. I think she sold out our country, and I think she sold out our democracy. And so it was not too long after that we decided to launch this campaign. But as many of you probably understand, that concept of selling us out isn't new. She's been selling us out for quite some time. It's all about advancing her own interests in Washington at the expense of everyone else, certainly at the expense of our district, certainly at the expense of veterans, women, seniors. It's always about moving up the ladder in the DC swamp and not about actually addressing the needs that we have. And so as we drive around the 15 counties and put now about 50,000, maybe 55,000 miles on my truck and talk with folks in town halls and meet and greets and coffee shops, I hear from folks who are concerned and upset about how Congresswoman Stefanik has sold us out. And it's not just Democrats. There may be a lot of Democrats here. I hope that there are actually a lot of Republicans and independents, because I'm hearing from them as well. They're concerned because our district is on the wrong track. Not just our country, but our district in particular. And what they're looking for is a moderate, someone that can push back against the extremes, the divisiveness that we're seeing, and just bring us together and actually start solving some problems. We need folks who are going to solve problems, not create more of them. And so in this campaign, we're really focused on fighting to reduce costs for working families and seniors while making sure we're strengthening our economy for everyone. We're focused on fighting for our freedoms, particularly a woman's right to control her own body and make her own healthcare decisions. And the Second Amendment. And we're focused on fighting to ensure the safety and security of all Americans. And yes, that's fully funding our law enforcement, that's securing our border. It's also about defending our democracy. And it's about ensuring our men and women in uniform, as well as veterans, have the resources they need to accomplish the mission. So those are some of the things that we're focused on here. I'm going to pause now, and I'd like to open up the floor for any kind of question, issue anyone would like to raise. Just raise your hand. We'll call on you, and we can go from there.
Ann has a microphone here.
So that they're recording.
Oh, okay. Hi, it's nice to see you again. I met you a couple months ago, or a month ago. When you're elected, okay, you're going to have to represent a lot of people that didn't vote for you. What type of things can you do in your first term to convince them that they were wrong the first time and that they should support you going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the first thing is that this doesn't stop. It's not a question of you only show up in the community when you're running for election. You have to keep showing up. So when you're not in Washington, D.C., you should be in the community, telling people what you're working on and listening to some of the concerns. And it's, again, not just talking to the folks that voted for you, it's talking to everybody else as well. I seek to be a representative for everyone. And I think part of that is also going to see me, you've probably already seen me in this campaign, willing to call out members of my own party I disagree with, and not necessarily just be a party loyalist that caucuses with the party that I belong to. I think we need more folks who are willing to put country before party, not just as a campaign slogan, but how they operate in Washington. Because the only job that I'm looking for right now, and when I'm elected will have, is to represent you, not to represent the Democratic Party, not to represent the moderate party, which is something we're also running on, but to represent the people here of New York 21 across the political spectrum. And some of the people we'll be representing won't even be voters. Folks like Abby right here, we're seeking to represent her. She can't vote yet. She will soon, but she's engaged and she's interested and she has needs. All of our members of our community have needs. And so it's always about showing up, addressing those concerns. It's about speaking truth to power and talking with one clear voice about the needs of our community and representing that in Washington, and then evaluating me on my record. You know, when I cast a vote, folks have every right to expect that that vote was the right thing for all of us.
We used to go fairly regularly to protest outside Congresswoman's office, and it was after certain votes, like about environmental issues affecting the Adirondacks. And we stopped because it got too scary. There were huge Trump banners. There was a lot of verbal abuse being lodged at us. And I think that was kind of the final straw as far as thinking that a conversation or that a difference of opinion would be listened to. And you know, the pointing American flags at you and trying to run you off of the front of her office. So I'm just really grateful that you're willing to do what you're doing, and I agree with those who said that she doesn't back the blue, those signs that are out there. Her response to January 6th makes that really, really clear. So, thanks.
Well, thank you for that. And what I might just offer in response on those two parts. The first is about the level of where our public discourse has gotten. It's no longer about discourse, it's about threats. It's about my team versus your team. It really has turned into not just sport, but gladiator dynamics. It's professional wrestling. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. So long as we're fighting with one another, we'll never be in a position to fight for one another. And we all have to realize the only team that's ever mattered is not the red or the blue, it's the red, white, and blue. It's the Team USA. We have more in common than we do that separates us. Our differences on a policy matter are just preferences. And that's why I think the preservation and questions around preserving and protecting our democracy are so important. Because if we don't have that, nothing else matters. Our inability to actually have a discussion about, you know, how we're going to preserve and protect Social Security and Medicare for the long term. Those are policy discussions. You got think tanks who are producing all kinds of white papers about that. That's not a reason to threaten someone. And there's no place in our democracy to threaten physical violence, because we cease becoming a democracy when that happens. And that's why January 6th to me was such a compelling and terrible event. A story that I've told some folks is that that day I got a phone call from one of my favorite people in the world, my niece Hannah. Hannah was 7 years old at the time. And my sister had been watching the events unfolding of January 6th that afternoon, and she became visibly upset. My 7-year-old niece asked her what was wrong, and my sister described for her that some bad people were hurting good people in Washington, D.C. And without skipping a beat, my sweet 7-year-old niece asked, "Is Uncle Matt one of the good people getting hurt?" And so I got a phone call from Hannah and reassured her that I was fine. But we talked about how violence was never the right answer. Good people did get hurt that day. Some people died. What happened on January 6th and what happens on events where people are launching actual physical threats of violence, when you're executing your First Amendment right, we're going to talk about freedom, it's about the First Amendment right to protest, to lobby and ask your representative to actually represent your interests. Those need to be respected and without any kind of threat of violence. So what happened that day and what has happened in examples like that is not okay and should be just dismissed at every single turn. You brought up about backing the blue and supporting our law enforcement and the dynamic we've seen from some politicians. Yes, I think Congresswoman Stefanik, how when push comes to shove, if their career and their future is at stake, they'll stab the blue in the back. It's not about backing the blue, it's about stabbing the blue in the back. So we saw that on January 6th. Unfortunately, Congresswoman Stefanik's lies led to the events of that day, which resulted in the deaths of 5 police officers and the serious injuries of over 140 in the worst attack against law enforcement in our nation's history. We've seen very recently, Congresswoman Stefanik has been verbally attacking and putting a target, I think, on the back of federal law enforcement when she didn't like the way that the FBI has been trying to protect our national security. And even recently in our own district, there's a federal correction facility, the only one in New York 21. And federal corrections officers have been trying to get Congresswoman Stefanik's attention for quite some time due to some really poor working conditions, understaffing, they need additional pay. It's a labor workforce issue. And she's been non-responsive. And they called her out on it. And how did she respond to that? She attacked them. And so when we talk about backing the blue, your actions have to speak louder than your words. And unfortunately, in this regard, Congresswoman Stefanik's actions speak very poorly of her.
If you have the opportunity to debate, how will you explain your support for the Second Amendment versus hers?
Got it. Great question. Now, there may be a dependency there on a debate, which we've agreed to for. Media outlets all across this district, it is a big district, so in order to make sure that all voters have an opportunity to see it on their television screens, areas up in Plattsburgh, out in Watertown, here in the broader capital region that can sort of reach everyone. And we agreed to 4. She agreed to none. And a deadline has come and gone that was provided by those outlets on this past Friday for some response so that they can organize and find the airtime and actually do the logistical work. And she's not responded. It looks like a debate will not be happening. No matter what you may hear from her staff, they haven't provided any real response. But we're going to keep calling her to account. And let me get to your specific question because I can offer it right here. The question is really around support for the Second Amendment. I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. Swore an oath to the Constitution. I think it's a lifelong oath. Carried firearms in the line of duty throughout my career and time in war zones. I'm a gun owner myself. So I'm always going to support the rights of law-abiding gun owners. The question we have now in front of us as a community, though, is born out of a recognition that gun violence is a problem. Rising rates of gun violence are plaguing our country and our communities, and right now, the #1 cause of death of our children. That's a problem, and we need to recognize and address it. And fortunately, law-abiding gun owners, those of us who support the Second Amendment, recognize it's a problem. And so for me, it's about pursuing common sense solutions to that. Universal background checks, red flag laws, which allow our law enforcement to have the tools and be equipped so that if someone's going to present a threat and a harm to themselves or to others, to not have the tools of war and weaponry to pose that harm to themselves or to others. And so there are common sense solutions that a coalition of us can bring to bear right now, and I think that that's happening. Congresswoman Stefanik, however, doesn't believe in common sense solutions, so far as I can tell. We know that she's married to someone who is participating in the gun lobby, and I haven't seen any kind of action on her part that is geared toward reducing gun violence. On the contrary, it seems like she's seeking to make sure that every cop killer, kid killer, domestic abuser, terrorist has unfettered access to all the kinds of weapons they need to pose harm to our community. So you can't speak out of one side of your voice about the crime in our country and not actually empower our law enforcement to actually address that crime. And so that's how I would respond and address it at a debate.
Thank you.
I'm on the fence. One of the things that scares the living day. I'm on the fence. One of the things that scares me is that you're going to vote lockstep with Biden. It comes to the border. Biden has blown it. I've got 2 little kids here. They start handing fentanyl out in these trick-or-treat candies because our border's open. They're going to put 87,000 new IRS agents on to enforce what I pay in taxes. Why don't they worry about putting 87,000 new border agents on to protect our country from this illegal flow of what we don't even know that's coming in the country? You guys don't even know what they've caught. You've been in the CIA. You understand it. I mean, Afghanistan was a disaster in itself, $87 billion. How can you stand there and want to vote with somebody and be in that same party?
Well, let's unpack that a little bit. But you raised some good concerns. No, you raised some very, very valid concerns. I think the first thing is that I'm not voting with anyone because of their party or because of whatever their position is, whether it's the president or a speaker of the House or whatever it may be. I'm always going to call out members of my own party when I think that they're wrong. I've certainly said this. I'm not going to support Nancy Pelosi for another term as speaker. I don't think she should continue on. I think we need to have some changeover in leadership, certainly in New York 21 as well. But I do think our border security is a real issue. And from my perspective, I care a lot about this because I am a former national security professional. We can't have national security if we don't have secure borders. And I believe both parties are to blame for not addressing this challenge and this issue. Both have sought to weaponize border security or comprehensive immigration reform to win elections, not to actually address either of those problems. I don't trust members of either party to come up with legitimate solutions because, quite frankly, despite Congresswoman Stefanik's 8 years in Congress, she's not offered real solutions to this. During the 4 years that President Trump was president, she actually opposed some measures that he tried to put forward with respect to the border security. And so she goes whichever way the political wind blows, and far too many members of Congress do that as well. I think my solution, take it out of the hands of these politicians. I'd like to establish an independent, bipartisan commission outside of Congress to evaluate the security of the border, to actually offer the American people a position and an understanding that they can value and they can trust about how secure our border actually is, where the gaps are, and what the recommendations are to close it. I also believe that once that happens, we then do it. We need to secure, excuse my language, the damn border once and for all. And to make sure it is completely secure, and we give the resources to our Border Patrol agents, who I've spoken with some up in the northern border. They're going through some serious hard times right now. Some of them are having to go down to the southern border for deployments, puts pressure on their families, puts pressure on them. Their mental health is not doing too great right now. We need additional resources devoted to that. But this is an area that does require a lot of time, attention, and focus. I think we take it out of the hands of the politicians. And then, and only then, can we actually pursue comprehensive immigration reform. Because guess what? We actually need to do that too. You even talk to some conservative think tanks about how do we grow our economy. We can't grow our economy without more people. And we need to have secure, trustworthy, humane processes by which to bring people into this country. The only way you can do that is if you have a secure border. So for me, it's a very sequential sort of thing. I don't trust the politicians to give us honest answers. I think they're weaponizing it for political purposes. And for me, it's a security issue. We need to address it. For your kids' security and safety. On the issues of fentanyl and drugs, it's not just about border security, it's about port security. Because some of that stuff is coming through other ports of entry. And we need to make sure that we're providing the kinds of resources to address that problem. Some of that stuff is homegrown too. We want to make sure that in our communities, our law enforcement have the kind of resources they need to address those manufacturing these things, distributing them, and then also providing the kind of substance abuse we need in our communities to really put an end to the demand side of that equation. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. We need serious people interested in actually doing the work. I'm sorry?
You're not going to continue to go on this drunken spending spree that the rest of these Democrats have been going on.
So the question now, I think, is around fiscal responsibility. And you'll see, if folks are interested, you may be interested in checking out moderatepartyny.com. We released a platform for the moderate party that we've created in this race. And one of the tenets, particularly on the economic side, is about fiscal responsibility. We can't have government not balancing the budget in the way that we do in our own households or our businesses. Government needs to be responsible with the dollars, the hard-earned dollars that we're giving them. And so we need to evaluate any government expenditure, I think, through the lens of, does it provide us with safety and security? Does it help grow our economy? Or does it help provide for important programs like Social Security and Medicare to take care of folks? Those are the lens I think we need to evaluate. And then, from an oversight perspective, people like me going to Congress need to make sure the executive branch of government is operating within the margins that we've asked them to and don't have fraud, waste, and abuse, because that will happen with big bureaucracies. And the oversight responsibility of the legislative branch is critically important to help cut that out. And that's how we can get some cost savings as well. But far too many members of Congress are not doing their job. They're not showing up to do the oversight responsibilities. They're spending time on Fox News or maybe making trips down to Mar-a-Lago. Do your job in Washington.
Could you possibly,
Go now. We'll go there in a second.
could you possibly explain for this gentleman? Would it be possible to explain the additional IRS agents for, as the gentleman asked?
Yeah. So there's been a talking point that's out there about hiring 87,000 IRS agents. And it's my understanding that some recent legislation does provide additional resources for both the Treasury Department and the IRS because they've been woefully underfunded for many years. Any of you have maybe had some issues with your taxes in recent years? How long has it taken you got a refund? You've been waiting maybe months, maybe a year? Right. The IRS has got a serious backlog and serious challenges related to this. And so it's my understanding that funding has been provided to make sure that they're whole, they can do their job. Now, one of the jobs we want our IRS focused on is not on us. We want those people who are seeking loopholes and jumping through all kinds of hoops and skipping out. Just because you're ultra wealthy doesn't mean you get to skip out on the responsibility that we all have by being a part of this community, by paying our taxes. And unfortunately, too many people get to skip out on the bill, and we need to correct that. But there shouldn't be any kind of focus, and as a member of Congress, I will seek to do this. We shouldn't be focusing on hardworking people, middle-class folks. The work that needs to be done is preventing the high net worth individuals from not paying their fair share.
Matt, I wonder if you could talk for a second about the influence of social media on our elections, on our everyday society.
Sure. Social media is awful. You should all get off of it. It's a real problem. What I think started off as a good idea to help connect us and to share pictures from family events with cousins and long lost family members has now turned into a business model that creates division within our country and our community. Facebook is a real problem in that regard. And it creates spaces, unfortunately, for folks to treat one another terribly. And we all probably know, and maybe sometimes are victims of saying the thing online in a comment on Facebook that we would never say in person because we feel that there's some sort of comfort. And I think the expectation is that, listen, our kids are watching. How we comport ourselves online should be the same way we comport ourselves in public. Now, hopefully that's a higher standard. But those are the kinds of responsibilities we bring upon ourselves when we do utilize these tools. But there are real issues, I think, about the business models where we've seen certain social media platforms leverage algorithms that create echo chambers of division and hate. And I don't think that there's enough oversight around these things. I also think that there's a question and concern around monopolies. It's not just with social media and big tech. I think that there are a lot of monopolies that we used to have a proud tradition in this country. So I've read, from the early parts of the 1900s where we were busting up monopolies and actually creating competition in our country and in our economy that reduces prices. But that's an area where I think we need to look into some monopoly busting as well. Because we've seen the unfortunate influence where some messages are promoted, other ones are downscaled, no one knows what's true and what's not. Something gets put out there, a piece of disinformation, and unfortunately there have been efforts by foreign powers like Russia and China and others who have created opportunities to influence our elections by putting that kind of disinformation out there. And I think there needs to be a greater responsibility and vigilance on our social media firms to be on the lookout for that. I think they learned some lessons after past elections, but that's something that we need to make sure that there are maybe regulations in place to hold them accountable to. Much like we do in the financial services industry, banking and finances, we put in place regulations, and when they violate them, there are some serious penalties. I think we maybe need to look into that with social media and big tech as well.
Most of the counties in the district legislate or whatever to keep the young people here,
Yeah.
to keep the jobs here.
Yeah.
Because they're flying. They're leaving the state, they're leaving, they're going elsewhere where they think is better. But what would you do to keep the kids here?
Yeah. It's a great question, and it is interrelated about keeping people here. One of the reasons we had to go through this redistricting exercise and this district got so big is because we lost population. A lot of people left the district. A lot of people left the North Country. They left it in many instances for jobs and better economic opportunities. I did spend some time, a lot of people know me as the former CIA guy. I did spend some time in business school. I spent some time in the private sector doing business development. And so I'll put that hat on. You can't grow. Is anybody here a business owner or an entrepreneur? You can't grow a business without making investments in it. You have to, whether it's equipment or personnel or marketing, you make investments in order to grow businesses. The same thing is true for our local economies. We need to make investments, in some instances, around critical infrastructure. Some of that's around roads and bridges. Some of it's about the new kind of infrastructure that should be an expectation everywhere around broadband and cellular service. How many people have a hard time getting regular access to broadband or drive around and your cell service drops out? But some of it's around the kinds of services that we think are necessary for a community to thrive. Healthcare, childcare, human and social services. These are the kinds of investments we need to be making in our community to keep people there, to attract people to be there, and then, pretty confident, employers will come. A lot of times, not to criticize local economic development, but sometimes they create a tax incentive to try to attract the employer, and they think that that's going to be the solution to everything. But all it takes is for that employer, for the economics not to work for them anymore, and they leave, and communities are devastated, right? Because that was the lifeblood, the engine for the community. How do we create resiliency within our communities so that when the employer comes or goes, we're still humming along? And we create more of a flow of employers coming and going than we have people coming and going. We want to make sure that we have a community that can thrive. I will give credit to the state who has done some great work around the DRI initiative. And I know that Gloversville, correct, is a recipient of a DRI grant. Those are great opportunities for us to create those community spaces in downtown environments where people can gather, where they can play, where they can, recreate, where they can have dinner, and we can come together as a community. And we need those kinds of things. And so I'd like to see federal government maybe looking into how we can help supercharge some of that. I also think that there are some opportunities to be had around addressing the housing challenge. Throughout much of our district, affordable housing is such a challenge. It's not for lack of structures, though, or it's not for lack of land. And maybe it's not we need to build new structures. Maybe there are opportunities to renovate existing ones. Maybe there are ones where we can tear down the blight that we see throughout some of our communities that maybe is an eyesore keeping people away. And so there are opportunities, I think, to have some tailored programs where we can be making the kinds of investments to address the challenges that we face in our communities throughout many of our rural communities. And that's, I think, the preeminent challenge that we need to have is by identifying where those investments are that I believe are pro-economic growth investments, make them, and then see our communities thrive. Oh, sure.
Thank you. Question about back to fiscal responsibility for a minute.
Yep.
In the last 20 years, our national debt has gone from $5 trillion to, I think, approaching $30 trillion. And there doesn't seem to be any bipartisan approach by either the Democrats or the Republicans that this is a serious issue. And so I think it's one of the most serious issues we have as a country. And we're talking 30 trillion, we're not talking 30,000, we're not talking 30 million, we're not talking 30 billion. There's a lot of zeros in 30 trillion. Is it reasonable to expect that there will be a bipartisan approach if you see this as a problem? Do you see this as a problem? And is it reasonable to expect there'll be a bipartisan approach to that?
The first answer is easier than the last one. The first answer is yes, I do see it as a problem because it's unsustainable. That hockey stick that you just described just keeps going up and up and up. And the long-term implications for our nation are pretty serious in terms of maintaining these kinds of deficits and a long-term debt, especially when some of that debt is owned by China. There are big challenges about having foreign powers really in control over our long-term debt and fiscal strength. It has implications for a lot of the programs that many of us love and enjoy, like Social Security and Medicare, and it requires folks to come together and actually solve problems. So while yes, I agree it's a top challenge and something that should be a top priority, I'm not sure we have enough serious members in Washington who are focused on addressing top challenges. I see a lot of performance artists in Washington who keep getting elected and go in front of television and say crazy stuff or get on Fox News or do other, stunts, but they're not actually coming together to solve some problems. Now there is an entity, a caucus, it's called the Problem Solvers Caucus in Washington, and this is a caucus that I'd like to be a part of. It's bipartisan. Half the members are Republicans, half the members are Democrats, and these are the kinds of issues I believe that they elevate. Why every member of Congress is not a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus, I think is telling in and of itself, because it maybe suggests that they're not actually interested in solving problems, but that's something that I'd like to be a part of, to help bring together those kinds of coalitions that are necessary. I've talked about coalition building a little bit in this campaign. I'm running as a moderate. We're building a coalition from the middle out. Not only do I think coalitions are necessary for winning elections, they're necessary for governing effectively. And so those are the kinds of things that we're going to need to be able to do. Okay.
My name is Ken. How are you going to make me feel safe that you're not going to fall in the pitfalls of that swamp?
Great question. Because I do think that at the end of the day, the swamp and folks who are only seeking to advance their own career and not address the problems facing our communities, those are the ones who are creating insecurity. The challenges around safety and security, yes, certainly extend to our public safety and the challenges of rising crime and gun violence and making sure that we're funding our law enforcement. But when I talk to folks and hear about their insecurity, it's not just about that. It's about economic security. Do we have a local economy that can keep our kids here and help attract folks? Do we have job security? Is my job for the next 10, 15, 20 years or economic employment in general going to be safe and secure? It's about health security. Do I have access to the healthcare resources that I need in my community, or do I have to drive a significant distance? Do I have the full suite of resources, not just healthcare if I break a leg or have a serious injury or whatever it may be, but it's also about mental health resources or substance abuse? Are those things available to make sure that we're providing health and well-being? These are the kinds of challenges we need serious members focused on so that we're not creating a sense of insecurity within our community. Because I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I've heard from folks who feel that tremendous sense of insecurity. Yeah, after 2 years of a deadly pandemic. Yeah, after what we saw on January 6th and what we see ongoing right now. But security comes from knowing that you've got somebody that's got your back, that's always going to fight for your best interests, not theirs, and who is not going to fall victim and prey to the swamp. And so one area that I think I can offer to you, particularly on the aspect of trust with respect to the swamp, are a couple of things that I think are important for what we should be seeing in Washington. First one, term limits. I will fight for term limits for every member of Congress. We have it at the presidential level. 8 years seems like a good amount of time. I think that should be the amount of time for somebody in Congress, 4 terms maximum. And if I'm not able to get term limits passed for everybody, I'm going to self-impose it. I will only serve for 4 terms in Congress. So you have my word that if reelected multiple times, I don't want to put the cart before the horse here, but I will only serve that many number of terms. The second thing is we got to get the money out of politics. the corporate PAC money that we see, I swore off corporate PAC money. I pledged not to any acceptance of that. So we've done that in our campaign. But that's just me. That's got to be everybody. Congresswoman Stefanik is beholden to so many different corporate PAC entities who provide funding for her campaign and feed her reelection. It's always about the grind. It's always about getting reelected and what kind of resources can be brought to bear and addressing their interests and not the interests of the community here. So that's a huge problem, and it's one that needs to be addressed. And then the third thing that I think is really common sense and should be done immediately, we should be banning members of Congress and their families from holding or trading stock. No one should be, our elected representatives should not be using that opportunity we've given them to get rich and enrich themselves because of the unique information they get in office. So that's and there's some bipartisan support for that. Unfortunately, though, we need to see senior members of both political parties, to include someone like Nancy Pelosi, to hold account and make sure that they don't have that kind of stuff. So those are at least three areas where I think we can restore some degree of trust to make sure that we are focusing on your safety and security, and that your elected representative will always have your back.
Hi, I'm Bruce, and thank you for being here. I have a question about Citizens United. To say that money is speech, it says that speech is money, and we all know that's not true. Warren Buffett complained that his tax rate was far less than his secretary's tax rate. That was never true in this country until recently. And I think it was Citizens United that did it. Can that be changed without a constitutional amendment?
I don't know the answer to that question. That's going to be the one that I'm going to punt on for right now, but look into. I suspect, and what I will work on, is actual legislation to help. And there's some folks who are doing this right now around dark money, where it's untraceable, where even right now you may have the ability, if you're a corporate entity, to try to contribute, but if you don't know where that money actually came from, could be coming from overseas and foreign powers. There are serious concerns we should all have about who's funding, political candidates, and that should be transparent. But I do believe we should be precluding corporate entities from having a say, particularly at an outsized influence level, about who their elected representatives are and what issues they're working on. Maybe there's some legislation we could put forward to limit the amount. And so, while yes, maybe corporations are people, and but limit the cap. Right now, an individual has a cap about what they can contribute to a federal campaign. Why can't a corporation have as low, if not lower, of a cap, so that they don't have as much of an influence? I just came up with that common sense idea right now. It may not be unique, but seems sensible. It's something we'll try to work on.
Equal to their tax rate.
Yeah, right.
Hi, Matt.
Hi.
I'm a Republican, and I'm damn glad you're running. All right. This is mostly for you, but also for the folks that are here. I've been around a very long time. I've watched a lot of people from all over the country go to Washington with the same ideals you have, because the ideals are wonderful. They really are. That's what our country's all about. And I consider you a real novice, and I know you've been thinking a lot about this because you're a smart guy. You're from the Poughkeepsie area, right?
Yeah.
Arlington High School.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, the problem I see is that all the things we want to have happen, it's not going to happen because there's no way that you're going to go down there, no matter who you get tied up with, even if it's all the good guys, that you're going to be able to put out all the guys who are now entrenched and hold the power. Just look at what's been happening for the past 2 years, and then the 4 years before that from the opposite side, and then the 8 years before that from, it's just a hard thing. Everything that these folks ask you to think about and your answer coming back is exactly what we should do. And all the talking heads on television are telling us the same thing. It depends which program you look at, but they're all saying basically the same thing. We have to change this, we have to change that, we have to get money for this until we get to the vote. So what do you think now? You're looking at it and you got some dreams. I know you've got some dreams. What do you think the chances are of your making an actual difference in the next 8 years?
I'm glad he gave me 8 years. I thought he was going to. I appreciate that. I also appreciate you being here. You're in good company. My mother's Republican, so we welcome all kinds of Republicans to this campaign and to these forums. I think you raise an important point, and it's one that I think that there is a responsibility among all of us to try to change a culture. I alluded earlier to this concept of so long as we're fighting with one another, we'll never be in a position to fight for one another. We got to stop evaluating our elected representatives based on how good a Republican or how good a Democrat they are, how good they are at party loyalty, how good they are at lobbying attacks against the other side. That seems to be a main driver of a lot of our politics. Certainly the people who are currently in power want it to be that way, because that's how you win elections. That's how the social media companies are earning money, by dividing us and keeping us divided. But you may notice we're not getting a heck of a lot done while that's happening. I think another part of the problem is that I was talking with a former Republican member of Congress, and he was talking to me about frustrations that he had during his tenure about so much time is spent on messaging votes, not actual votes to actually achieve particular pieces of legislation that will impact and change people's lives. Like 80% of what we see going on down in Washington is around sending a message, putting the other side on the hook for voting for or against something. We got to spend our time actually doing the work that the people have asked us to send them down there to do, not score political points, but actually achieve some things. Now, I can't promise anything. I'm not going to be that politician who makes false promises. But the one thing I think may happen is that when we win in November, I may get a little bit of, cachet from having defeated the number 3 in House Republican leadership. And I'm going to use that currency to deliver results for our community.
Hi, Matt. Thank you so much for coming. I think every single voter in this district should meet you, truly. This is really, really impressive. A comment: after your 8 years as our congressman, then you can be 12 years as a senator and then 8 years as a president. How about that? Go for those term limits. Yeah, go for those. Quick question about the poll that you've put on your Facebook page. I would just like to know, can we really get excited about that? Yeah. I mean, and can you speak to the source and like the survey group? And
sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. So it's our polling firm in our campaign, and we did a poll. And what we learned is that when voters hear about the candidates who are running, Congresswoman Stefanik and I are neck and neck. This is a real race. Because folks are concerned across party lines about how she has sold us out. They understand that, we saw it on January 6th, and we've seen it as she's stabbed Liz Cheney in the back and took a position of leadership and is really just focused on the next opportunity up the ladder. But we're seeing it in our community. She hasn't made any of those investments that we need in our communities over the last 8 years. She voted against veterans. She talks out of one side of her mouth about supporting veterans in our country and in our community, but she's voted against them time and time again. And these weren't just messaging votes. These were real votes for real benefits. She voted against common sense healthcare benefits for our service members as they're transitioning out of the military, so that they were automatically enrolled in VA healthcare. Common sense. She voted against education benefits for our Guard and reservists, so that their time in uniform counted towards their GI Bill. She voted against it. And in many of these instances, she was the only member, or at least one of the very few members of the New York Republican congressional delegation that voted against it. Lee Zeldin, who's running for governor, voted for these things. So she's way out of step with her party. And the most egregious one, in my view, is how she voted against the PACT Act. So this is a bill that provides health care benefits, particularly for those service members who served in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, where I served, who had prolonged exposure to toxic burn pits and are now suffering terrible cancers as a result. This is my generation's Agent Orange. And we need to make sure that we're providing the kinds of healthcare benefits and, you know, the benefit that you get of the entitlement that you should have, this presumption of it, by making sure we're making those resources available. Congresswoman Stefanik voted against it. Her defense of it is disgraceful. She was concerned that it would deprive other veterans, I guess, from care. We shouldn't be balancing the budget on our veterans' backs. We shouldn't be picking which veterans are entitled to benefits and which aren't. So we've seen time and time again that she has sold out our district. She's sold out constituencies like our veterans. You all know she sold out women. Certainly now pushing forward a national ban on abortion and a ban on contraception. I don't know where she thinks that's popular, but that's certainly, listen, it's a real problem too, because we've seen certainly after overturning Roe and the Dobbs decision, the threat to millions of American women across this nation. But now that kind of national abortion ban that she wants to push forward, that she's co-sponsored, the Lindsey Graham bill, she wants to target women here in New York. That's a blue state bill, because that's a national ban. And then we know she's really sold out our seniors. She's voted against efforts to reduce the cost of prescription drugs. She's voted against efforts to cap the costs of prescription drugs, to cap the cost of insulin that so many people are having a real hard time with. And many years ago, she was the architect around gutting Medicare and Social Security, and part of their platform is to continue to push forward with that. So she is advancing her own career at the expense of the needs, the common sense needs of our community. And when folks know that, they certainly are concerned about it. And partisanship doesn't matter when you've sold us out.
I guess I have a two-part question. One is very simple, and that is, do you think people should be able to own assault rifles? No. And then the other question is a real complex one, I guess. It's related to the national debt and the way that our country is going, the direction that our country is going. Nobody wants to work. Everybody talks about creating jobs. There's jobs all over the place. Every place you go, the businesses are looking for help. They can't find help. Nobody wants to work.
Yeah.
Our government is doling out money, stimulus checks. I mean, paying off student loans. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think the students should be looked after, but you just can't arbitrarily all of a sudden say that you're going to dole out money for people that have been neglectful in paying their loans. So I just want to know what you think about what can be done about the direction that this nation is going in related to our national debt and people not working, not wanting to work because they got all the benefits for not working.
Yeah.
So that's my question.
Okay. A couple questions in there. I'm going to try to take them in order as I recall them. The first one was around assault weapons. Now listen, I do not support a ban on assault weapons. And the reason why is because of what we talked about earlier. Right now, we have a serious challenge in this country with rising rates of gun violence. When you say the term assault weapon in a room like this or many rooms throughout the district, different people hear different things. I carry a real assault weapon in war zones, fully automatic. When some folks hear assault weapon, they think my semi-automatic rifle that I use hunting. And when you start talking about bans, people start seeing that wedge that's coming to divide the coalition we need right now to help keep our kids and communities safe. So I think ill-defined assault weapons or assault-style bans are a real challenge because they create more harm than good in this moment. There is an opportunity for us to actually focus on safety and security and reducing the rates of gun violence by not focusing on the weapon type, but by focusing on keeping any firearm out of the hands of somebody that's going to do themselves and others harm. That's where the coalition of gun owners, those of us who support the Second Amendment, those who want to keep their kids and communities safe, are focused on right now. I think let's keep them focused on that. And I think the distraction that we see from some folks on the far left or the far right about bans one way or the other are an effort to try to divide us from actually solving a problem right now. So that's my position on an assault weapons ban. In terms of worker shortages, serious problem right now. We don't have enough workers. And it's not because people are getting paid to stay home. Those benefits ended many, many months, if not years ago. Right now, we have a serious challenge, and in order to actually address the challenge, we've got to address the problem in a serious sort of way, and that we don't have enough workers. We got a lot of population that's aging out of the workforce. We have some folks who have decided right now that maybe they're going to early retire or maybe take a time out and go shift to a different kind of career. We got some folks right now that want to work but can't because they can't find childcare that's affordable or accessible. And so how do we move forward with common sense solutions? And that's a really important one, to make childcare that's accessible and affordable in our community so that working parent that wants to work, can get back into the workforce. So there are ways to do that. There are other areas, though, where it comes to our agricultural industry, where we do need some folks who are immigrating here to this country. And so I think revising some of our visa programs to be able to create less burdens to increase the flow of migrant workforces that we can use to help grow our agricultural industry and create more workers here. Some of that's going to require some border security work too. So some of these things are interrelated, and it requires serious members of Congress who are interested in actually doing the work and solving the problems to bring those solutions to bear. But the supply side challenge, much of what we see from inflation is a dynamic of supply and demand being imbalanced. We got a lot of demand throughout our economy. And one of the supply challenges we have that isn't allowing us to meet the demand is around our workforce. Labor and workers is a supply side issue, and we need to increase opportunities. Some of that's going to be about paying them more and creating opportunities for that. Maybe that's increasing the minimum wage, but in some instances we have jobs that are being offered right now at a higher than minimum wage that can't be filled. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Some of it's too, you tied into this whole question about college and student loans and the challenges about how costly that recent proposal that came from this administration was. Listen, I'm somebody that actually has a lot of student loans, so this is a personal thing for me. And a lot of people have that challenge. And we offer, a lot of people didn't blink twice when we offered tax breaks for the ultra wealthy a couple of years ago. And I'm not necessarily saying we got to pick winners and losers, right? I do think we got to come forward with common sense solutions. One of the challenges and critiques that I have for this student loan relief effort is that it doesn't get at the root cause of our education system being so expensive. And in fact, it may actually be counterproductive to that. We need to actually make our education more expensive so people aren't, or less expensive so people aren't having to take on such significant burden just so they believe they can get ahead to get the kind of job that they need within our community. I also think we need to boost, whether it's at the high school level or certainly within our communities, building trades and apprenticeships. That college isn't always the path. So there are a lot of things there. So I think I have one more question, and then we're going to break down for if you want to come up and ask things one-on-one.
I really think you have a legitimate chance of winning this election. I'm a registered Republican. I think anyone who takes the time to come and hear you speak is going to be impressed. My concern is that there are a lot of people who are not going to come and hear you speak. So name recognition becomes a critical issue. And how do we get the Democratic National Party to recognize the fact that they have an opportunity here and to start pushing a little money this direction so you can get out there and get your face on TV, on billboards? And I have another question, is the Stefanik playbook is going to be to drag you through the mud. How do you prepare and how do you combat that?
Sure. Great questions. I'm going to take the second one first, and then I'll end with a response to the first one. Yeah, I mean, we all know the playbook. They're going to be dirty, they're going to smear, they're going to spread lies. The commitment that I've made to all of you is I've got thick skin. They can bring it on. I'm happy to take all those slings and arrows on behalf of all of us. And I'm also not shy. And so we'll keep it focused on the issues, but we're going to be countering it every step of the way. And we're going to launch our own honest, based in issues attacks, as we have, to hold her accountable for her record. I've not been shy about calling her a traitor. I think her efforts around January 6th, she is a traitor. And I don't use that term loosely. So I'm okay with being dragged through the mud. I'm going to stand up just fine, and I'm going to stand there in front of all of you and hopefully take that incoming fire on behalf of this campaign and our desire and expectation for the kind of representation that we deserve. And then on your first question, I'm not sure if there's going to be some sort of national money coming from the Democratic Party. I've made it very clear from the start of this campaign what kind of Democrat I am, and it's a country before party Democrat. And so I've not genuflected or bowed down to the party leadership. Not quite sure they've liked the fact that I've pledged not to vote for Nancy Pelosi in terms of her next, the next session as speaker. And so I'm not expecting or beholden to any national party in order to get their resources. We are going to work hard though. And so if you do have the opportunity to pitch in $5, $10 to this campaign, I'd be grateful to you for that. But more than that, because you mentioned this is about name recognition and getting the word out. We've got 40 days left in this election. Every single one of you has an opportunity, if you'd so like, to join our campaign and volunteer to sign up and do so. Some of that's about knocking doors. Some of it's about phone banking. We got Republican phone banks calling other Republicans, so you guys are more than welcome to help join that effort. Because it is going to be word of mouth. It's going to be talking to 5 or 10 friends of yours, or maybe independents or Republicans, or even Democrats who aren't really engaged in participating in a midterm election. Let's get them engaged. You got 40 days to do it. We got a lot of work ahead of us, and we're only getting started. We're real excited about all of this hard work ahead, and it's opportunities like this to talk to all of you, to hear about the issues that matter most to you, the challenges confronting you and your families, but the hopes that you have for a brighter future that keep me going. So please keep it up. Thank you all for having the opportunity to be with you.